When people thought the Earth was flat, they were wrong. When people thought the Earth was spherical, they were wrong. But if you think that thinking the Earth is spherical is just as wrong as thinking the Earth is flat, then your view is wronger than both of them put together.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all humankind. Your hosts here in England, Matthew Russell and Chris Carney.
Oh yeah, baby!
Yeah, baby!
Asimov!
Isaac Asimov. What a legend, hey?
Absolutely.
Isaac Asimov. A lot of his writing is absolutely fantastic. I'm not massively into his sci-fi, weirdly, although there are some epic sci-fi that he's done, like The Last Question and things like that. But this was from something called The Relativity of Wrong.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Einstein's relativity, of course.
He didn't call it the
General
relativity of wrong.
Yeah, he generalised it. He generalised the relativity of wrong. Spherical Earth is wrong, but it's not quite as wrong as thinking the Earth is flat.
Right.
It's quite a good science thing, isn't it? That virtually all theorems at some point are going to be proved wrong. Like Newton's theories of motion really are slightly wrong. They've been proved wrong by Einstein, but they're not as wrong as like other things. So they're still right. So there is a relativity of wrong.
That's actually quite a good nod towards our subject today, because conspiracy theorists will often say that sort of thing, or sort of hairy-fairy types, sort of ethereal, sort of spiritual types are always like, well, it's just a theory, and I'm going to go with something completely different, and it's like, but this is the best theory we have, and it's very robust, so I'm sticking with that.
It's the God of the gaps, isn't it? I think that if people think that because you don't know everything, then it's likely that what you do know is wrong. And that's not quite right. I mean, there's an element of truth to that, but it's not quite right, as in just because we haven't completely filled up the kind of slots of the knowledge of quantum theory doesn't mean that what we have at the moment is wrong, because it's highly, highly, highly measured and shown to be right for most of the time. So it's there is no gap for God to exist in there, for example. Or, I mean, David Lynch's book about catching the big fish is possibly the most annoying book I've ever read. And David Lynch, as a filmmaker, is one of my absolute heroes. But that book is utter garbage. It's like, basically it sort of says that the grand unified theory is somehow something to do with transcendental meditation. And he's got there because of the gaps in our knowledge. And it's like, you can't just fill in the gaps of knowledge with woo. It's just ridiculous.
Religious people have been doing that with God for years.
Oh yeah, well exactly. Well, what I wanted to do, Chris, is go through the entire history of how we know that the Earth isn't flat.
I'm so excited to get into this, like, without any shadow of a doubt.
Why the Earth isn't flat?
Tell me.
Well, I really like this because it kind of, you have to sort of take in the entire human journey to really get there, because ultimately it's amazing that humans have figured this out, because if you start to think about how hard it is, if you don't have the knowledge that we have now, how hard it is to kind of even think about what these things are. So it is like a sort of human journey, isn't it, this really? And I like to think that humans maybe sort of in their present day form appeared about 300,000 years ago, or thereabouts. It's about right, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
300,000 years.
Yeah.
And of course, that is an absolute blink of an eye in cosmic terms, right?
Yeah.
Really, only the past 100,000 years have you got like all these. Well, it took some time before until there's evidence that humans had sort of abstract thinking and were able to plan things and understood symbolism and art and danced and played music and made tools. And
It's all right,
hunting
kind
and
of
things
around fires, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess a little bit must be around free time as well. Just the time to actually sit there and think.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the fire brings the safety a little bit. It brings the ability to stop. It brings obviously the nutrition from the food, but it also brings us sort of the first sort of community of sitting around something, of being around something, gathering. So that's where, I think more language would have developed, and, actually, like, as you say, sort of pointing up at something and going, "What's that?" But obviously not saying "What's that," but more like a.
well, it kind of. I mean, I think it's quite funny when you on school trips and you see things like cave paintings. Sometimes it can be a bit boring, but I think it's because you don't realise exactly what they mean. That they mean that back 40,000 years ago, for example, they think that there's cave paintings that show the precession of the equinoxes. Now, that is remarkable knowledge, as in really remarkable. I mean, it's something that the layman in the street now wouldn't know anything about, or would even have a clue it was happening. I.e., the only way that humans could do that is this abstract thinking and symbolism and thinking over vast time periods. Like the precession of the equinoxes, by the way, takes 26,000 years.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah. So that definitely spans a few generations, that one.
Exactly. But I mean, you can notice it, but you only really notice it over lifetimes. In other words, this is you have to be deeply connected to the night sky. And if the precession of the equinoxes, just in case you didn't know what it was, but basically the Earth obviously is spinning on its axis. But when you spin a gyroscope on a table and it starts to wobble, and it will do that kind of slow circular motion.
Yeah.
So not only have you got the spinning axis, but the axis itself will actually kind of have a tiny circle of motion.
Yeah.
The Earth has that similar motion, except it takes 26,000 years to do the entire circle. And as a result, obviously, the stars that you see at any time of day or any time of year actually shift. In other words, the equinoxes, all the star signs actually change. So when you're expecting like Virgo to be in the summer equinox, it suddenly isn't, and Capricorn's there instead. So those star signs are actually moving over thousands of years, and they've actually noticed this 40,000 years ago, or there's evidence of it. I mean, it's not a slam dunk, that one, but certainly humans are tracking it. They're tracking this idea that the stars are slowly changing. I mean, bear in mind, they have no idea what stars are, or what the Earth is, or that the Earth is spherical, or anything. They don't know anything about it. For them, they're just tiny dots in the sky that are moving. They're
doing it out of necessity, though. That's the important thing. That's why everyday Joe wouldn't know about it. And I didn't really understand what equinoxes are, but that's why everyday Joe and me don't understand it. But somebody back then would have been learning about it for necessity. There's a reason why it's important, or it's helping them in some way. Do you think?
Well, it must do. I mean, I think that things like Stonehenge are pretty good evidence of how important the night sky is and tracking it.
Yeah.
Mainly because, of course, there are certain times where you can go hunting for certain types of animal, or certain types of crop are going to be available.
Yeah.
And if you keep a track of the night sky, like the obvious one is if you can see the Orion's belt in the UK, you know that it's the kind of autumnal time. If you can see the summer triangle, it's summer. So if you can keep a track of the stars, you know roughly when it is. And if you can then put a monument up so you can track it really accurately, then you can know the exact same bit of the year each year round.
Yeah.
And that must be very, very exciting. Essentially, they've got a clock, a very big clock that's, not down to hours and minutes, but it is down to days.
Yeah.
And that has to be useful in terms of trying to keep a track of, animal migration and vegetable growth and all those kind of,
personally,
things.
like I know it's early winter when there's Easter eggs in Asda.
Exactly. So you're tracking time exactly in the same way that the ancients did.
Exactly the same.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So I mean, there's even evidence that they put in things like comet strikes and stuff like that into their cave paintings.
Wow.
Because they affected, because they really affected their lives. A comet strike, for example, that may have actually affected food for decades and generations and things like that. So it would have been associated with poverty or change.
Yeah.
And you think, God, yeah. So they are massively. They know that their lives are, intertwined with the stars.
Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
However, the first proper evidence is Hipparchus.
Yes.
Of Rhodes, and that's like 200 years BC.
So we've shifted forward a fair amount here because, you just haven't got a lot of evidence before then. But, a bit of a shift forward, but not that far forward.
A lot of it is the stuff isn't written down, or we haven't found that written evidence. So we really don't know how sophisticated the people were before the Greeks, really. And because even Hipparchus didn't write it down. It's only Ptolemy, 100 years later, who basically wrote about Hipparchus's work.
Yeah.
And he explains the precession of the celestial sphere. And, he actually literally explains. He doesn't explain how it's happening. He just says that it is, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that 200 BC people can write about this thing that takes 26,000 years, that for pretty much 99% of people on Earth today simply don't have a clue about or find it hard to understand in the first place.
Yeah.
The fact that humanity's got that deep connection and enough to sort of see that subtle effect, that goes to show that, I think even like for 200 BC, I think it's incredible.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yeah, and it is. It's this science, the beautiful standing on the shoulders of giants. It starts very, very far back.
Yeah, well, like you said, there is a moment where the first human, just trying to stay alive, their universe would have just been the local environment, right? Just the field, just the savannah that we're on, or just the jungle that they're in. And it's like, no, at some point, a human or a hominid, maybe even before, must have looked up and gone, "What the hell is that at the moon?" For example, and just gone, oh, "Is the moon playing a part in my life?" And that really must be what separates humans from everyone else. I mean, do dolphins talk about the moon?
Well, they said so long, and thanks for the fish.
Yeah. Do dolphins ever think that the moon is affecting their lives? I don't know, but I don't think they do.
No, and I went to see an octopus in the museum the other day, and it was just a wonderful sight. It's brand new to the World Museum, and I was just like, this is just incredible, amazing, intelligent creature. But I don't think it says, "Why am I in this tank?" I still think it's like, this is my life. Feed me. They do amazing things. They can make structures, and they can make dens with doors that close and things like that. But I don't think they say, "What's that?" or "Why is this?"
Yeah. I'm pretty certain that octopuses and dolphins don't think about the moon and wonder what it is. And they certainly didn't notice precession.
No,
do you know what I mean?
No, they weren't there. They weren't recording the equinoxes.
No. But I guess the breakthrough in terms of like having to really take looking at the stars seriously is farming, isn't it? Like 12,000 years ago, like that whole idea of planting seeds and growing them and having it all in one place, trying to save time. I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it? Instead of like trying to find your food, you literally grow it next to you.
Make it. And then when you make it, all of a sudden, we may as well build a little town while we're here. And let's build a little place where we can all gather. And, off we go.
Yeah. Now, at some point, they must have realised, obviously, there's the sun. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
And obviously, that definitely affects your farm.
Definitely.
And the moon probably affects your farm as well. And they must have thought, there's the sun and the moon. The weird thing about the sun and the moon is they appear to be the same size. Now, for me, if anything, that kind of chucks you off the trail a little bit about what those things are, because you might think that they're similar objects.
And why wouldn't you?
No, why wouldn't you? You just no idea what they are. Where do you start to break down what these things are? It's easy for us because we're brought up with that knowledge. I can't remember when I knew what the sun and the moon were because I learnt it at such an early age.
Exactly.
But imagine not knowing what they are. And then shooting stars. You would have seen shooting stars all the time. Remember, there's no light pollution.
Oh, the stars must have been amazing back then. Imagine.
Yeah, and comets.
Yeah.
And like I said, asteroid strikes and things like that. And you would just say, what are these things?
At some point as well, there would have been maybe a supernova or two.
Now, so here's the thing. So at some point, someone must have said, I wonder how long this goes on for, this flat land. And the fact is, there is no way you can tell that the Earth is not flat when you're standing on it, right?
Right. Absolutely.
As in, why would you think any different? Like, you look around, you're not moving, you don't feel like you're moving, you know what it feels like to be moving, particularly if you've ridden a horse or whatever, and it's like, so you know what it's like to feel like you're moving, you're not moving, everything looks flat, you can walk up hills and down hills, but no direction is harder than the other on average. It's not like if I walk south and then walk back north, it's not like it's on average, it's different. So you just have the feeling that the Earth is flat, and eventually you will walk and you'll find sea.
Yeah.
So I guess like the real thing to think of is that obviously you've seen things floating in water. Maybe that the land that you live on just floats in an infinite sea, sea that just goes on forever. You're just this disc of land that's afloat on a vast ocean.
Yeah. Imagine the sort of explorers at the time would just find that sea, and then hopefully if they found their way back to the town, they would be like, I found it, got to the end. And then, there we go. And I'm going to go that way now and see what's up there.
Yeah. So if you're traveling a lot and you've got this, say the Greeks have now got a country that stretches a long distance.
Yeah.
And so, you can trade and you can go to these different places. Now, some of these clever Greeks, and remember, they're entirely attached to the night sky. Probably everyone has a knowledge and, a really kind of innate knowledge of the night sky, something that feels very connected. Now, the Greeks would have been wandering around their vast territory, going to various ports, doing trade and stuff like that. And some of them would notice, for example, that the pole star in various different cities in Greece would have been at a different altitude.
Right.
So that it would have looked out and it's like, that's funny. Like, when I'm at so-and-so, it's 14 degrees above the horizon. But when I'm here, it's 16 degrees above the horizon. Now, that is odd, right? You must think, I wonder why that is, right? So there's one kind of thing that they might start thinking about and going, that's a bit odd.
Yeah.
So that's just a little clue, but I don't know how far you'd take it at that point. You just go, that's odd.
Yeah.
Then you would have had people that actually braved going out into this vast ocean to see if they're, how far that went. And, even in Homer's Odyssey, which is, written 1,000 years BC, you've got mention of people being on the rigging and being able to see land before people on the boat. So when you're sort of being taken up by a large swell, you can see land, but when you go back down, you can't. Now the explanation for that is that it's over some kind of curved horizon. But even then, you must have realised that water sort of lays flat, that it sort of just goes flat.
Yeah,
And,
there's no, apart from the waves, there's no water mountains, is there?
Yeah, no, it becomes flat. So yeah, that's odd. Mm-hmm. And then you would have got Phoenician sailors that apparently there's note of them going round the coast of Africa, and the sun would be coming up in a different place. Mm. Normally it would rise in the east or the west. Rise in the west. It rises.
It rises in the east, sets in the west.
Rises in the east, sets in the west. Right. So there we go.
Yeah.
But suddenly it's like it's coming up in the north because they're sort of going around this globe. But of course, they just don't understand it. Mm. That's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now here is a mind-blowing thought, like about 600 years BC.
Okay.
There's this guy called Anaximander.
Great
right?
name. That's like a portmanteau of several other names.
Yeah, Anaximander.
Yeah.
Anaximander. Now, Anaximander had this realization that instead of the Earth being like a floating, just something on a vast ocean with nothing underneath it.
Yeah.
What if the Earth floats freely? It's just floating freely without falling, and it isn't resting on something. It's just floating freely. Now, it sounds like it's trivial, but Karl Popper, one of the people that kind of helps define the scientific method, describes it as one of the boldest, most revolutionary, and most portentous ideas in the whole history of human thinking.
Amazing. And it really is. Yeah.
It really is. It may even be the first scientific thought.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, and because you can test it a little bit. But what that does, it allows you to think of the Earth as things going underneath it. So instead of the sun just disappearing, it can now be going around, and it disappears because it's beneath you, going on a journey beneath you.
Wow.
Right. And the same with the moon. And then suddenly it's like, oh, wow, they're objects that are orbiting the Earth. They're going around the Earth and they're going underneath and coming back up again. Now, obviously, they were wrong because we're orbiting the sun. However, because obviously that's going to be difficult because you've got to unpick this idea that the Earth is spinning and it's orbiting.
Well, again, we're talking about sort of a big leap forward here, and we have absolutely no reason to think that we could be orbiting around the sun, because again, to us the sun is exactly the same place as the moon. It's about the same size as we were saying before. So we have no idea of the sun's size, mass, distance, and anything like that. So that's fine. You've made a good step there. It's enough for now, I think. You know what I mean? Like, okay, you've done a good thing there. We'll get to that bit later. Well in, lads.
Oh, no, absolutely. And of course, so Pythagoras and a couple of the other Greek philosophers around that sort of time actually started to talk about the Earth being spherical.
Right.
And one of their sort of clues was that the terminator of the moon, in the way that you have a crescent on the moon.
Yeah.
That shows that the moon must be a sphere, or almost certainly is a sphere, the way that the light shines on it. And they're working out that it is a light shining on a spherical object up in the sky. Now, that's pretty cool. So they then sort of say, well, if the moon's spherical, why not the Earth?
Yeah.
And then you got a little bit of time later, 500 BC or something like that. There's a guy called Anaxagoras.
Ooh,
another cool name.
Yeah.
Anaxagoras. And he basically notices that the Earth's shadow on the moon during a lunar eclipse shows that the Earth is round.
Yeah.
You actually see that it's round. It doesn't show that it's spherical, but it certainly shows that each time the Earth goes in front of the sun and is casting a shadow on the moon, it just so happens that the disk is in the right shape. You never see it, you never see a line or anything like that, which is quite funny when
turtle.
So it's quite likely that it is a sphere. So Anaxagoras, it does make a bit of a leap there. So this is 500 BC. Now, at that point, Plato and the Greek philosophers, they basically just talk about spherical Earth all the time, but they don't say why. But clearly, that is now the modern thinking of their age, that the Earth is a sphere.
Yeah.
You know that we're talking 1,400 years ago. Sorry, 2,400 years ago. We're talking.
Yeah. So this is how far behind. This is about how far behind flat earthers are.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is that there is this kind of, it is a slow build of knowledge, isn't it? And you can understand that if you don't build up each little bit and kind of go, well, how do we explain this? How do we explain that? You think how long it takes from that point to get to the fact that the Earth is orbiting the sun.
Yeah.
It's like it takes an enormous leap of imagination to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then everything falls into place because you've got all these other bits of evidence that you've been amassing. And then suddenly all the jigsaw pieces fit. And it's just like, oh, wow. And that's why I love science, because you've got this building up of data and you just can't work it out. And it is like a jigsaw puzzle. And then just this one piece goes in the right place and then suddenly everything falls into place.
Yeah, yeah. And then obviously then you get the with this type of thing as well, the oppression of the sort of the sort of thought thinking of the day, the general thinking of the day as things go on. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, this challenges sort of God and stuff like that. So that's kind of coming along later, isn't it? So it's the jigsaws fit into place, but it also, like, they were massively punks as well, because they really had to sort of battle against the actual thinking of the day, and it was quite dangerous as well. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I think I've leaped ahead a little bit there in the journey.
Well, well, no, but I think that's a really interesting point to pick up now, because it's clear that the Greeks weren't particularly bogged down with religious or dogma, weren't they? They truly had a sort of open scientific mindset somehow.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess they made so many amazing leaps forward. I mean, there was a load of nonsense going on at the time as well. They believed in perfect shapes and all those kind of things. But and sometimes that delayed things immensely. But in fact, when they did give into dogma, it delayed human discovery. And,
of course.
And instead of going, it's got to fit with the data. It's like, no, it doesn't have to fit with the data. We just have to come up with a story that fits the data. It's like, no, that's not the way of doing it. But, thought itself and the way that you conduct experiments, et cetera, is also a discovery. It's not something that we're born with. These things have to be discovered.
Yeah.
The scientific method has to be discovered in a way. And we're just not there yet. Even the Greeks weren't there yet. So it is, that is really fascinating in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely, yeah. So where you've got a society that is free to think, and I mean, we had literally the beginnings of philosophy, then things move forward at a better pace than when there's a dogma sort of trying to control.
Now, Aristotle was totally on it, basically. He noticed that you couldn't see stars in Egypt, that the ones that you could see in Europe.
Yeah.
So he thought about that. He had already taken on board that the fact that the Earth was almost certainly a sphere like the moon. He'd reasoned that the moon's, the moon, its shadow was round, and the crescent showed that it was a sphere, and that the Earth's shadow on the moon showed that it was a sphere. So he was really pretty convinced.
Yeah.
And And he decided that the reason why the bodies were spherical, and this is a massively brilliant piece of thinking, is that everything is pushing to a central point, to the center of the Earth, which for him was the center of the universe. And so everything is pointing to this. Everything is being pushed down to this central point, almost like there's a black hole at the center of the Earth, which in some ways there kind of is.
There's a mass
gravitational pull.
Yeah,
yeah. But obviously they're nowhere near getting to that level of thought yet. But I mean, that's a pretty big leap towards that thought, though, isn't it? That the whole idea that everything's pushing down to this central point, which is amazing. And then everything else is moving around in shells above us, including the sun, moon, and stars that are all on these shells that are also being pushed down to this point, but for some reason are being held in a kind of shell around us.
Right.
And so, that's a pretty big jump, right?
Huge.
Right there,
absolutely
right?
enormous.
It's huge.
Amazing.
And Archimedes, I mean, the reason why these names are famous, I guess, is because these really are the Newtons and the Einsteins, etc., of their time.
Definitely.
To say the least. So Archimedes also suggested that fluids weren't flat when they were resting, that they actually were part of a surface of a sphere. It's just that sphere was so enormous you couldn't see it. But if you could step away, you would see that the surface of any fluid at rest is the surface of a sphere, where the center is the same as that of the Earth.
Goodness
That's Archimedes saying that.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God.
So
oh my God, that's amazing. So at that point, the spherical Earth is very, very, very much like, this is what it is. This is what it is.
Yeah.
And because there's so many little bits of evidence, and it all kind of makes sense. And obviously, famously, Aristophanes, in 276, 194 BC, thereabouts, a couple of hundred years BC, he is able to actually try and work out how big this circumference is of the Earth. How everyone's talking about the Earth being a sphere. Well, Aristophanes thinks, well, I wonder how big that sphere is. What's the circumference?
Yeah.
And so he comes up with this absolutely genius method of trying to work it out. And so he knows when noon is.
Yeah.
And what he does is, the Carl Sagan does this extremely well. Like from the series Cosmos, Carl Sagan shows the Aristophanes experiment extremely well, and there's loads of YouTube videos about it.
And you also read a brief history of almost everything by Bill Bryson, which is amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a great book, that is. Yeah. So it's basically he realized that I'll go into why he thinks that the sunlight is parallel, because he realizes that the distance to the sun must be so far that the light rays are going to be parallel, so that's not going to affect this particular experiment. But if you have poles in the ground at noon in different parts of Egypt, so there's Syene and Alexandria is where he did it, and he knew the distances between those points. He got someone literally to march those distances out, and then measured the angle of the light at each of those poles at noon.
Right.
And it turned out that he was able then to sort of work out what chunk of the radius of the Earth that must be, and then worked out, the full circumference of the Earth.
Smart cookie.
It is a smart cookie. Now, it's really hard actually the of saying how accurate he was, because there's quite a few things. There's quite a few things that that we don't really know, because he either says it's 4 million stadia or 804 million stadia, but there's a disagreement about the translation of what he's actually said. Then there's also a disagreement about what a stadia is. You know, how far is it?
Yeah.
Now, if you're really kind to Eratosthenes and take the 804 million version, and then take a version of the stadia that works as well.
Yeah.
There's, he could actually have been spot on with, but basically 804 million stadia is between 126 million, 168 million kilometers.
Okay.
And it's approximately 150 kilometers. So it's within that range. So he's pretty accurately got the circumference of the Earth right.
Amazing. But we have to be kind to him to make that fit, though.
Oh yeah, you do. You genuinely do. But the actual reality is, his method is totally sound, and you could do that same experiment today if you wanted. And of course, you could do it more accurately because you've got clocks and things like that to measure the time, and you've got probably more accurate equipment to measure the angle, etc., etc. So you could do that very simple experiment yourself.
Yeah.
And like, you could have someone on a mobile phone and talk to them and say, "What's your angle now?" So you wouldn't even have to rely on clocks.
Yeah.
You could just measure that angle, and it's really easy trigonometry to get you there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what we shouldn't skirt over is why Eratosthenes thought that the sun was far enough away that the lines are parallel, because this is mega important. I mean, this completely trounces the flat Earth model. If ever I can't see how you can get round this. So we know that the sun and moon are going round us once a day, right?
Yeah.
That's literally unchanging. That the sun goes round us once a day, and you can basically, you and the moon does, as the Earth rotates underneath it, they both go round.
Yeah.
Now, the size of the moon doesn't change. You can hold up an object at arm's length, the same object, and it just covers the moon, and it will always be like that, even though sometimes the moon looks massive on the horizon and looks tiny up in the sky.
Yeah.
When you actually measure its angular size, i.e., hold your arm at arm's length and hold something that obscures it, actually it's the same size. The angular size is actually the same. So the moon is always the same size.
Right.
It doesn't change. But not only doesn't it change, it doesn't matter where you view it from. So you can be in Syene, you can be in Alexandria, you can be in Papua New Guinea, and the moon will always be the same size, right?
Yeah.
Now, for that to be the case, you've got to be near the center of the moon's orbit. In other words, if you're not near the center of the Earth's orbit, if you're slightly to the side, it's going to look bigger, right? And that is actually the case on Mars. So if you look up at Mars's moons, they are close enough that yes, you would actually see a change in size of Mars's moons as they orbit.
Amazing.
Yeah, but the moon is so far away, you can't see it. You can't see that change because the distances on Earth, the thousands of miles that you could travel on Earth, are nothing compared to the 250,000 miles that it is to the moon. In other words, it barely makes a difference to the size of the moon.
Sure.
So that is a piece of killer evidence that the moon is a long, 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 long way away.
And where are we now? What year are we? We're still BC.
Yeah, we're still BC. So, Eratosthenes has already, a lot of people have already figured this out, that the moon is a long, long, long way away. But Eratosthenes certainly has and has written about it. Now, how much further is the sun away? Well, it must be further away still, because the moon blocks the sun during an eclipse.
Of course.
You can measure the distance, the relative distance to the sun, with a bit of trigonometry in terms of looking at, if, for example, the most famous way of trying to work out how far away the sun is to use Venus, because Venus is very, very bright, and you can track it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But if you look at the motion of Venus relative to the sun, as it orbits, as you're looking at it, the Venus will get some distance away from the sun, but then it will stop and start to go back in again.
Yeah.
Right. And now, if you accept that we're orbiting, that we're all in orbit with each other, then just using simple trigonometry, you can work out that angle and work out how far away the sun is compared to how far away Venus is. And you can do the same with the moon. So you can you're just using a bit of trigonometry, work out just how much further the sun is.
And you know, when Aristophanes was in school going, "Sir, why are we doing trigonometry? I'm never going to use this." And he was like, "You'll use it. You will."
And you know, again, you can kind of do this with Venus yourself. If you sit for a whole year and observe Venus, or maybe do it for 5 or 6 years, you know, this is the sort of thing people used to do.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that the angle that Venus gets away from the sun is only about 46 degrees. It never goes above that, right? So that is its greatest elongation away from the sun. And which means, with a simple bit of maths, you can work out that the Sun-Venus distance is 72% of the Sun-Earth distance. So you can work out. So you've got some indication of that. So now, if you find out how far away Venus is, you can work out how far away the sun is, and you can work out how far away Venus is. For example, one of the ways is using solar eclipses.
Yeah.
So, the transit of Venus. So if you're using the transit of Venus, what happens is if one person stands on one part of the world and another person stands on another part of the world, as Venus enters the disk of the sun, you basically jot down the time, and then you can work out using parallax how far away Venus is, and it's very, very accurate.
I think I remember reading about the first attempts to do this, and a lot of them went pear-shaped because there was problems in
it's bloody difficult
traveling to those places, and people get held up, and unfortunately they didn't make it on time, so one person records it, the other person didn't manage to. It's like the other person doesn't make it back because they die on the journey. So you know.
I mean this is in the great time of European kind of dominance in the world as well, where you know, the massive sailing ships and people like Captain Cook, you know, that they're actually involved in these kind of scientific missions. These were enormous endeavours of the day.
Yeah.
You know, this would have been, I guess, measuring the transit of Venus from different parts of the world was the Large Hadron Collider of its day.
Definitely, yeah.
You know, it was the scientific experiments of the day, and it was pretty massive. Of course, it's much easier now because you can measure the distance to Venus by bouncing radar off it.
Yeah,
for example, and you can measure it very, very accurately, and then therefore you can work out how far away the sun is.
Yeah.
Aristarchus, I believe, he tried to measure the distance, the angular separation of the sun and the moon, when the moon's half illuminated, the distance between Earth and sun, and so you've got this again sort of piece of trigonometry where you can roughly work out how far away the sun is compared to the moon. And even though his reasoning was correct, he managed to say it was 19 times further away. Of course, it's not. It's 390 times further away than the moon.
Yeah, bit more.
I mean, what's frustrating about it is that the sun and the moon look like the same size, and this has got to be one of the craziest cosmic coincidences ever.
I totally agree.
I mean, it's totally mental because it's almost confusing because you could easily think that there's a connection of why they're the same size, but they're not. It's just total coincidence.
Yeah, the first coincidence that the moon will perfectly block the sun in an eclipse.
But at some point in human history, it was a lot closer. And some point in Earth's history, it was even closer still, and the tides would have come in hundreds of miles, and you know the moon would have looked very, very close, and earthquakes all the time because the moon would be pulling up on the ground. So, it's going to drift away at some point that we'll never have proper solar eclipses again.
Crazy.
But how magical is it that Einstein's general relativity was kind of proved by the fact that you can see stars behind the sun being bent around the sun.
Yeah.
And you can only do that during a solar eclipse. And you can only do that because it just so happens the moon is the right size to block out the sun.
Yeah.
We've literally got this amazing laboratory because of this insane cosmic coincidence.
Talking about peril, though, that's another one, because his scientists went to Russia to do that and were actually captured.
Yeah.
They were actually captured and imprisoned, weren't they? Because they thought they were spies.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, this is one of some of the greatest, scientific experiments of the day, and they seem like really mundane in a way now to us. But back then, you're talking exploration and around the globe, and it's just amazing. If you think like people like Darwin and people like that as well, the discoveries. Oh God. Yeah, the great age of exploration, isn't it? Really?
Excellent. Absolutely, yeah. And we're still in it.
Well, I guess, hopefully we're in it when we go out into space, isn't it? This is like the great age of exploration of space and all the knowledge that brings. It's just the knowledge that always comes your way if you explore.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing.
Aristophanes kind of worked out the distance to the sun and was able to work out that it must be, the light must be hitting us parallel, and worked out the circumference of the Earth. Now, it's just crazy, isn't it, that people could still believe that the Earth is flat after all those different sort of bits of evidence, and it doesn't even stop there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're not even in sort of ancient times. We're in super ancient times. We're not even like really old times yet with what people know already.
No. I mean, of course, there is that annoying period where we seem to have lost all information back from this glorious age of the Greeks, and the Greeks and the Romans. But it's not the only way that you can measure the circumference of the Earth, of course. Mm-hmm. Posidonius. Yeah. Posidonius.
We'll go with that.
Posidonius calculated the Earth's circumference by reference to a star called Canopus.
Right.
And you can see it on the horizon at Rhodes. But when he was in Alexandria, it's 7.5 degrees above the horizon.
Ah.
And because you know the distance from Rhodes to Alexandria, you can then, again, just using simple trigonometry, work out that must be 1/48th of the circle, because it's 7 degrees. So you multiply the 5,000 stadia from Rhodes to Alexandria by 48, and that will give you 240 stadia for the circumference of the Earth, which isn't far off.
Spot on.
Yep.
That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Posidonius shows them how it's done.
Is it Cicero? Cicero and Pliny?
Cicero. And I'm going to go with Pliny.
They both casually refer to spherical Earth, and Ptolemy he actually makes maps of spherical Earth and knows that he only knows about a quarter of the surface.
Right.
So he's fully aware of how big this thing is and how little he actually knows.
Yeah.
This knowledge is now starting to sort of spread across the world, and the Indians hear about it. And that the Indians are highly skilled in astronomy at this point, but they haven't actually come up with this themselves. But they take on board this Greek spherical Earth idea and completely use it and go, "Yep, this is obviously right." There's so much evidence towards it. Christianity spreads it as well. The Christianity takes this idea of the spherical Earth around with it. The Muslim world take it really seriously, because you can't pray to Mecca unless you know exactly what spot on a spherical Earth you're on.
Yeah, so it's another moment of necessity for them, which helps things move forward.
Yeah, and there's this guy called Ibn Hazm, who noted that the sun is always vertical to a particular spot on Earth at any point. So someone somewhere, the sun is always directly above them, vertically up. And if that's if that's true, which it appears to be, then the Earth must be circular.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation for it.
A little dive forward, there's a 12th century explorer called Muhammad al-Idrisi, Arab explorer who made maps, and he was definitely someone who was important in this journey. But I've only just started learning about him, so I'll get back to you on that one.
I'll look him up. It's really interesting how it takes so long, doesn't it, for those first bits of knowledge to be scratched out.
Yeah.
It's like collecting data, isn't it? It's the data that's missing early on, and you just don't know what things are, and you just need, every now and then, an individual or a group of individuals just has an insight that then sort of opens the flood doors for the next insight, and the next one, and the next one,
completely.
And they keep coming quicker and quicker and quicker until you get to our age, where people are writing papers every day about crazy objects in space and black holes and quasars and stuff like that, and you go, God, how much have we learnt since those days? And it all sort of thanks to these insights by these various individuals as you go through time.
We live in a time of great privilege of knowledge, and and even more so, like over the last 20 years, like we are so privileged with the knowledge that we have access to, and I think it seems to be going the other way with a lot of people, that they are rejecting that. And that's where these sort of conspiracies lie, and the sort of the flat earthers are. I mean, there's lots of other reasons why they join these communities, but I think it is, some of it's down to like a overprivileged to have that information that people would have absolutely killed for 100 years ago, and we have it and we don't want it.
Well, I think the vast majority of us want it.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I'm being a bit mean there, but
it's really easy to think that. I mean, all that's happened with flat earthers and those kind of other conspiracy thinking people is that they're able to find each other. Now, of course, then they can build up a little echo chamber, and then people might go, well, there's a whole group of people that believe that, so there might be something in it. But it's just, I guess the story's more exciting in some ways to feel as though you know something that other people don't know, for example. But also there is a kind of lack of trust as well with authorities. Science sets itself up to be an authority, and I don't think it should.
Right.
I think it should always show itself to just say, to be open to ideas, and to always say, but this is the evidence. And this is why we believe this. It's a theory, and it might be proved wrong. But if it is proved wrong, it's not as wrong as the theory that came before it. And that's kind of where we were at right at the beginning with
Absolutely.
Isaac Asimov.
It's a great quote. It really is.
Well, yeah, it cuts to the heart of the problem of flat Earth. It's like, people will say, Newton's laws of gravity weren't correct. They were proved to be wrong by Einstein. Therefore, what can we trust? And it's like, it's a different type of wrong.
Yeah.
You're not really understanding what it actually means. It's still part of the jigsaw puzzle that's leading to greater and greater insights.
Yeah.
Whereas flat Earth doesn't lead to greater insights. It can only take you backwards to a time when you couldn't see these other bits of evidence, and you didn't have these other insights. Now, if you're not going to trust the work of Ptolemy and Aristotle, etc., I can understand it. I can understand how you might have to kind of work it out for yourself, and it's a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult to work out that the Earth is a sphere, unless you trust the work of people that came before you.
There's a great documentary, and I forgot what it's called, but it is literally a documentary about flat earthers on Netflix. And it kind of covers them quite, sensitively. It's not they're not taking the mickey out of them, but it is just sort of following them and giving them that airtime to talk about why they think this and what they think, and it's just this great bit at the end, spoiler alert, where they're doing a version of the sort of Bedford level experiment. So they're out on a canal trying to prove that the Earth is flat, and there's this moment where they're shining a laser, and there's a chap holding a white card, and he's going, is the laser hitting the card now? And he's like, no, and then he goes, move it up a little bit. And he moves it up and he goes, is it now? And he goes, yeah. And then it ends and it's just like, oh, and they're going, we're going to have to rethink this. Like,
there's a several times where they instead of just accepting the result of the experiment, it's like, the experiment must be wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
They even do it with that. They even do it with a gyroscope, don't they? A very sophisticated gyroscope, and it essentially obviously comes out
there's a result that they don't want. Yeah,
but it's like, but the reason why it's doing that is because of some cosmic energy. I can't remember what it was. Some kind of ethereal energy, and that they needed to stick it in a jade case or something. It was like that special pleading to try and to roll back on it was just hilarious, but. You never know. It's one of those things, isn't it, where scientific breakthroughs sometimes are made by people not accepting certain experiments.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, and I should continue with the sort of sensitivity that I think that documentary showed to conspiracy theorists. And there's one chap who talks about ridiculing them is only going to like drive them further into the world.
It doesn't work. But I mean. There are so many ways now in the modern world that we can see that the Earth, confirm the theories that the Earth is spherical or more spherical than it is flat. And that's, taking a rocket up into, being one of the Apollo 8 astronauts, or, being on the International Space Station, or sending out a probe that takes pictures of the Earth,
There is a problem with some of those as well, but which I have to say with conspiracy theories is that a lot of them believe that we don't have any of those things or have done any of those things.
But that's what happens, isn't it? If you fully commit to that, because that's the bit that's unscientific, is to not have an open mind.
Yeah.
And they will accuse, obviously, us of not having an open mind, but it's have your mind open enough that your brain doesn't fall out.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's if you have to come up with a reason why a piece of evidence isn't right, and that reason is conspiratorial, you really should look at your core belief and say, maybe I need to let that go and put a bit of trust that these other bits of evidence are actually correct and not conspiratorial, because obviously everything just becomes part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, I think I generally found that with conspiracy theorists who I've met and also interacted with online, they generally buy into them all, and so it just becomes a sort of a race to the bottom, in not just in flat Earth but in moon conspiracy, all the way down to, in some cases, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and things like that. So it can actually be quite dangerous, I think.
Yeah. There's lots of reasons why people are conspiratorial thinking, and there are a sort of range of them that are extremely dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. QAnon. I mean, literally, the QAnon shaman has been convicted, hasn't he, this week? And they've shown him to now have denounced QAnon and its theories, but his lawyers saying that he has some serious mental health problems. But yeah, I think the Capitol riots were really a sort of pinnacle of this thinking, and I'm hoping that it's a tide that's sort of now receding. Let's hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely linked to social media, isn't it, somehow? Yeah. And it's linked to, but social media is new, and maybe we'll learn to cope with it a little bit better.
Definitely, and also, that also the QAnon riots was also a combination of not just that thinking, but also having a figure of authority who was certainly not discouraging that behaviour as well. Yeah. So he was empowering them. Yeah, I mean, it's just madness to think back to the last year. It's unbelievable. Anyway,
yep.
How can we continue to prove that the Earth is more spherical than flat?
Well, I think do you know what? I actually think one of the easiest ways to do it is to be in a city that has lots of high-rise buildings, because you can see sunlight on windows of high-rise buildings.
Yeah.
Minutes before you can see the sunrise. In other words, if you're at the top of those buildings, you can see the sunrise. Now, how do you explain that with a flat model?
Well, you make it work. Right? You make your model work to fit the narrative.
It's nuts. So I think, the fact is I can watch. I'm really fortunate that I'm on the coast and I can see some beautiful sunsets pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And I watch the disk of the sun go down below the horizon, and it's clearly the disk of the sun. It's not the sun going so far away I can't see it. It's literally going beneath us.
Yeah.
And you can literally physically see it. And it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
that I don't, I see it with my own eyes. So I think it's really fascinating how it's a story. It's a true story of what it is to be human. No other animal could really come up with the fact that the Earth is a sphere. It's just it's not possible, and it's through abstract thinking, all those things that we had, all those 40,000 years ago in our caves, learning how to think abstractly and to paint. Yeah. And that is the story of being human, isn't it?
Amazing.
And we should embrace it.
Truly, yeah. I just want to say one of my favourite examples of evidence for us is Brian Cox flying in I'm going to get this wrong, I think it's an F-16. And they're basically chasing the sunset. So it was on his most recent series, but his most recent series was a look back on his previous ones, wasn't it? And it was really, really good. But this is such a beautiful example where they're just traveling at the same speed as the Earth is turning, and they're just watching the sun never set. And it's absolutely wonderful. I think they speed up as well, and the sun rises again. It's just incredible. Absolutely amazing.
And of course, obviously, if you believe in rockets and space and space probes, it's fairly obvious that the Noah have a satellite that sits there looking at Earth as a little blue marble.
Yeah.
And you can go and look at that footage and look at the photos that it's taking every day of the weather patterns and stuff. It's there. You can see it.
Yeah.
It's a sphere. You can see it. It's not a surprise.
Yeah. It's not a surprise to anyone. Yeah.
No. I'm not even sure that people do believe the Earth is flat. I think people might even just be liking it for the publicity.
Yeah, I'd say that the influential figures, certainly in that documentary, which I really should remember the name of, but you guys can find it if you search, Flat Earth, and you'll see it on Netflix. The influential figures, I don't believe for a minute that they believe it. The sort of, there's a guy and a woman, and they're just manipulators.
They're definitely taking the piss, those two.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. If you want to see a fantastic breakdown of a scientist talking to a flat earther, you should check out Scientist v Flat Earther on Lad Bible. I know the guy. I don't know the flat earther. I know the scientist. I know him. But even my son's friends now call me Scientist Matt because of that video.
That's amazing. Okay. You got to get that certificate, that the certificate that Lynn said she was going to get for you.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I do need that. Right. Enough. Chris, where should people go if they want to learn a little bit more about Flat Earth? I might even stick the Lad Bible video in the notes.
Oh yeah, drop it in. I want to watch it again. It's been a while, and I'm going to go to interplanetary.org.uk to have a look at that.
Boom. And then if you like what we do here on the Interplanetary podcast, why not nip over to patreon.com/interplanetary and join the club and help support us, because it is through the patrons that this keeps going, and the patrons also get guests and everything else, and are just the most awesome group of people.
What an amazing bunch!
And insane! It's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So shout out to the current patrons, and if you want to join us, it's a lot of fun in the Discord. So many cool people in the Discord, much cooler than me.
And me.
So I think that wraps it up. We managed to talk for an hour about flat Earth, Chris.
Absolutely.
I think that's good enough.
And you know, one of my favourite memes, my favourite flat Earth memes, is that the Earth couldn't be flat because if it was flat, cats would have pushed everything off it by now.
So true. That is so true. That's it.
Take care, mate. Don't fall off the edge.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.